So I have a stylus and a board as well. So I'm very happy to share my thoughts. So a couple of topics were given to me today. One in terms of um, taking products from lab to field, and another in what is the role of IP and so on in this process. So I don't know the exact background of the participants today. So I believe that, I mean, from your introduction, I understand that some of them may be incubation managers.
Yes, sir.
I see Mrs. Jaya Umadikar from Incubation Cell. Very happy to see you here.
Good
So
afternoon. Good afternoon, Pro.
afternoon. Um, my talk will be a little bit more on the generic side, and I will speak more on the design aspect of it, and then come to the specifics more probably through the question answer session. So I've combined both topics in this title, where I thought I'm gathering together my thoughts on lab to field. Um, I mean, that is the topic, and my thoughts on commercialization of academic innovations. So, good afternoon, all of you. As the moderator had introduced, I am a professor in the Department of Mechanical Engineering at IIT Madras. In case you are on Twitter, that is my Twitter handle. So, my overall interest is in remote inspection of realistic structures. So when I say realistic, what I mean is structures which are complicated, for example, with ribs and stiffeners and so on. As you see here, this is a wing box coming from one of the fighter aircraft in the Indian Air Force. So this structure is really one of the challenging objects to inspect. So my core field is in inspection, and particularly I'm interested in applying the tools and technologies we developed for these kinds of complicated structures, and also in very challenging conditions. So for example, those conditions could be under sea, they could be at very high temperatures, they could be structures under very high pressures, for example, as they occur in oil and gas refineries and so on. As you will see, I emphasize this as I go on. These very strong interactions with industry are for me the bedrock of the ability to translate technologies from lab to field. So the first foundation for any product to reach the market is to be able to understand the needs of the market really. What are the requirements, what are the gaps that are prevalent at this point of time? What are the tools and techniques that people want to use and that are not available right now? This an intimate understanding of this process is, to me, at the heart of commercialization activities. So another note here is that, perhaps I'll also touch upon this later. I am going to speak particularly from the point of view of commercialization through startups, which I believe is relevant to many of the people gathered here today. There is also another venerable old route to commercialization, which is we as academics develop um, intellectual property, and then we license these out to established companies and industries and so on. So I will caution where that approach fails and why we have particularly focused on startups as a route to commercialization. So a little bit of more of my own background, and again, this is very important as far as I see it. So my work is academically rigorous. Now you would have seen, even from the time that the Compare announced, these numbers have changed. So I have more than 75 journal papers, about 19 IP filings, one recently granted. And what is sad is it takes so many years actually within our Indian patent system for IPs to be granted. Although I am learning that this is getting faster and faster now, especially if we go through the Startup India route. I learned that you can have IPs granted faster or coming for examination faster. But for me, it has taken about 6 years for one IP to be granted. And I've been at IIT Madras only, not long. Only this, it's going to be a decade. I mean, it is a decade just this December actually. And as I said, I have very strong interactions with industry, and my research is also collaborative and international. And that too, I think is very, very important to be up to date with the current state of the art across the world, and to benchmark oneself against the best in the world, I think are very, very important parameters in this process. So here is a snapshot of some of the technologies that have come out of my work and have been um, addressing various industry segments. And I've also put across various recognitions my work has received. Just recently, I was awarded the Swarna Jayanti Fellowship, which is one of India's top honors for scientists under the age of 40. So you can see here, my work addresses various sectors in terms of strategic sectors, whether it is nuclear and defense and oil and gas, or in terms of social sector. And these are all products that have come out of our group, and we are trying to reach these various sectors as such. And this work is recognized by both learned bodies as well as industry bodies. So I'm also very passionate about technology translation. So here I will say why. So historically, when I started at IIT Madras about 10 years ago, I was developing several of these products, and in fact, some of the pictures here are as old as 7 to 8 years actually. But one of the painful realizations I had at that point of time is, um, as an academic, as a university, we can go only so far in the product development cycle. If you're familiar with technology readiness levels, um, we can go from TRL 1 all the way till maybe TRL 4 or 5, which is in terms of mock-up trials. But beyond that, we do not have the wherewithal to do this. One of the reasons is, of course, we are limited by the student cycles. So students come in, graduate. The typical duration is 3 years, and 3 years is not really sufficient to take a technology all the way to field deployment. So it takes far longer than that. So we do not have the wherewithal to do that. On the other hand, we also actually sometimes do not have access to field sites where realistic conditions may prevail on an extended and long-term basis. So many of the technologies that had come out of our laboratory, for example, were dying out. There was no taker for this. Yes, we had top-notch papers written, there were IPs filed, and so on. But a proof of concept often is no good for the industry, which is looking for ready to deploy solutions. Here is where the role of startups comes in. So to me, this is how I look upon deep technology startups. Of course, different people think about startups in different manner, but for me and for our laboratory, our startups are the commercialization wing for our technologies. So why this is relevant is because several of these startups are founded by our own students who in fact would have carried out these projects during their stint at IIT, and therefore they have a motivation in taking these technologies to the field. So here on this slide are listed three startups. Planis is the startup that is the oldest in my portfolio. The company is now valued over 100 crores and has a annual turnover of over $1 million, and has operations in India and also in Middle East and Europe. In fact, the company has a subsidiary in Netherlands. So that's one of the stories that we are very proud about. On the left here, you find a picture from Planis work late 2018 actually, or early 2019, where there were miners trapped in Meghalaya, and Indian Navy had robots which were large in footprint. So the Supreme Court called upon us to deploy our small footprint underwater robots to try and locate what they call rat hole mines. So we were able to successfully locate the first mine that was eventually excavated for survivors. So this startup, Planis, is very well recognized. Just recently winning the National Startup Award from DIP, Government of India. I'm also associated with a couple of other startups into inspection of pipelines and sewer lines in particular, and also more recently an industrial IoT startup called Zyma. So to me, these startups are a technology translation arm of our lab, and they operate in the valley of death, as we call. So the valley of death is anywhere between TRL 3 or 4 all the way till TRL 9, which is field deployment. And this is where, as an academic institution, we do not have the bandwidth to carry out this translational process because they do not yield a lot of papers. This work is academically will not be looked upon very highly. There are not a lot of funding agencies that will support this process as well. So we are, as an academic institution, geared towards making cutting edge innovations, but we are not properly positioned to do this translational work. And this is where startups, to me, are very useful. So, although many people look upon startups as if they are cash cows, but reality is deep tech startups will take a long time to achieve maturation. So, minimum of 7 to 10 years is what is required, and even beyond then, these startups will not be valued anywhere the way maybe IT or finance startups will be valued. But that is not the motivation of why we are involved with these startups. As I said, it gives us great joy and satisfaction to see our products being commercialized and being deployed on field and making a real difference to the society. And that's how we look upon technology commercialization. And this process requires a long and sustained support of various stakeholders. I'll come to that towards the later part of my presentation. So now, with that introduction, so I would like to highlight what I usually do in my talks. I like to organize any problem in terms of these two things. In terms of the pillars of design, I'll skip. I'll skip the rest. But the three pillars of design, as I see it, are what were given by Vitruvius, an ancient Roman engineer. Is he says any product or any process or any system should have a form, it should have a function, and there should be a beauty to it. Okay? So if you look at commercialization as the process or system that we want to create, uh, the function is the first thing. We have to look at what is the function. Why do we want to commercialize this? And that's why I dwelled upon the motivation for a while, in the sense that the products and companies that you will create will reflect the function that you want them to fulfill in the end. So deep tech technology companies cannot be looked upon as cash cows. They cannot be looked upon as valuation omnibuses. Rather, they should be looked upon as product discovery entities. So these companies help in discovering markets, tailoring products to the market needs, and translating very high-end, cutting-edge technological innovations to field deployment. So that is the function as I see it for commercialization. And what is the form? The form it takes is, to me, this process can be done only by a startup. So the form can be many routes. So it can be that you can file an IP, license it out to maybe an MSME or to an established company. But to me, very clearly, this form has to be through a startup, through a commercial startup. And and I personally believe it should also be profit making and not as a not for profit entity, primarily because these are startups that are being founded by young professionals, young graduates, and they need to make their careers as well at the end of the day. And nothing works as best as giving them a goalpost to work towards. So those are the the final point. No design or is complete without examining the beauty of it. So what is the beauty of this type of commercialization? To me, the beauty is in being able to effectively address social issues. So, for example, um, I spoke about Planis being there at Meghalaya trying to rescue miners. Planis is the only company in the country that has inspected most major and minor dams for defects. Planis is the only company also that has inspected most of the bridges that are crossing rivers, that are crossing lakes and water bodies and so on within the country. So this is a huge social cause. Imagine the disastrous and catastrophic consequences of collapse of infrastructure such as dams and bridges and so on. And putting human operators in these positions risks their lives. And sometimes it is just plainly not possible. For example, if there is a dam with a reservoir with more than 100 meters depth, then there is no way a human being is going to be able to go down to those depths and perform those inspections. But you will have sluice gates at those depths. depths. You will have dam walls at those depths that could be leaking, that could be broken. So that's the kind of social impact that this startup is doing. Solinas, on the other hand, has been delivering inspections of sewer lines. As we just last month, we completed a large-scale inspection of a sewer pipeline network in a large commercial facility close to Chennai. So, and I do not need to emphasize enough that this is a demeaning profession where human beings are still used, but we are able to make a difference as such. So that is the beauty, as far as I see it, to this commercialization, that there is a social angle to this, and the social impact comes in terms of being able to provide world-class solutions at Indian affordable prices. So that is the beauty here. Um, Skipping some of this material here, I'll come to one more aspect I usually emphasize, is that the driving factors of any type of design process. And the driving factor, again, can be also applied to this commercialization. So we have to look at, now I usually joke here saying I put German words, because if I don't, then you won't believe I'm a professor, isn't it? So zeitgeist, or the spirit of the times. So clearly the spirit of the times for us in India today is in terms of the Make in India movement, or which is also has another branding in terms of Atmanirbhar Bharat and so on. So although this has been the zeitgeist of India for almost since our freedom movement, since we, because India missed the industrial revolution because of colonization, one of the calls from the freedom movement has always been to become self-reliant, to learn and master the approaches to technology that are available across the world and bring them home. So Mahatma Gandhi famously had the spinning wheel, but also other nationalist leaders, including Nehru and Sri Aurobindo, always emphasized the need for local industry. So that theme just keeps getting repeated and repeated over and over again. And perhaps this heart spirit of our civilization is still there, that we are still only playing catch up to the world and not still coming up, becoming the number one in terms of innovation and production. So that is the spirit of our times. So a zeitgeist can last even 100 years, for example. So the Baroque movement, for example, lasted 100 years. So we are still within this overall spirit of our times. Then the second aspect that emphasizes that is important in any process is the worldview. So the worldview can completely alter the way in which we tailor solutions to the field. So whether it is a communistic worldview or a capitalistic worldview, but in India we always take a mixed worldview. So I think that is our view, the middle path. And again, this is not recent, going all the way to the Buddha. We have always emphasized the middle way between the extremes. So no wonder India was non-aligned. India was not aligned to any political ideology. And even today, most of the Indian spectrum, whether it's across the board, is actually neutral in all these sort of views. They never tend to take this way or that way. So that is the spirit that we appreciate, taking the middle path. Now, in terms of the startups, where this comes in is, if you are creating a deep tech startup, we need to take a middle ground between products and services. We take a middle ground between government projects and private projects. We take a middle ground between Indian operations and world operations. So that is clearly our worldview. We try to work in the in the middle, really. And the third one is something I emphasize always, is total art, or Gesamtkunstwerk. So this is a philosophical concept that originated in interwar Germany, where the idea was that any design must incorporate an artistic element in its totality. So that means if you take minimalism, for example, that should span not just the design process, but also the material selection, but also the production techniques that we use, but also the advertisement and marketing that we use. So it is a total art, so it is not one or the other. And similarly, in our country, if you take Gandhianism, that is also a total art. You cannot be a Gandhian at the same time flaunt um, maybe a very flashy clothing and so on. So that's like a um, total art. And where this applies to the startups is that, and this is something that I emphasize very strongly, is that a deep tech startup must take a certain philosophical approach to its design, and everything should be design led. One of the reasons why we are still not innovating as much as we should and as we could perhaps is that we miss this idea of this totality of art, in the sense that we tend to mix and match. We always tend to think that we can take this from here, take that from there, and then we will have a whole. But it doesn't work like that. So we need to have a one unified view to the whole thing. So to summarize, in terms of product development, so the spirit of the times is make in India. Our worldview is staying in the middle, and I believe you should be close to a civilizational ethos to succeed as such. And the third aspect, which perhaps was there in the earlier eras of the Indian civilization but has been lost more recently, is that we need to take a total view of art and total view of the process as such. And to commercialization as well, this is as applicable as it is to design. So with that, the structured part of my presentation sort of comes to a close.